America's opioid crisis shows no signs of abating. New data out today indicates that deaths from drug overdoses in the U.S. reached a record high last year.
16 prior felonies. 4 victims left fighting for their lives in the ER. 1 final, tragic fatality. Tonight, we expose the terrifying spree of 7-year-old Bridgette Marie Washington, the Waterloo dealer who turned a quiet Iowa community into a danger zone. For 7 months, she flooded the streets with a grade A lethal cocktail, a toxic mixture so potent it paralyzed everyone who touched it. On January 2nd, they dropped instantly. One never opened their eyes again. After 15 failed chances at reform, the gavel just dropped. 252 months in federal prison. Total isolation. 0 parole. Before we uncover how this shadow network operated, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's get into the files. The streets of Waterloo, Iowa, have always been tough. But from mid-2025 to the opening days of 2026, a dark, lethal cloud descended that local authorities had never witnessed before. At the center of this storm was 7-year-old Bridgette Marie Washington. This wasn't some low-level street hustler. This was a 6-time convicted felon who treated the justice system like a revolving door. To Washington, a prison cell was just a temporary office. Washington didn't just distribute narcotics. She orchestrated a sophisticated shadow economy built on pure, concentrated lethality. For over 200 consecutive days, she spearheaded a distribution network that moved a terrifying arsenal: high-grade methamphetamine, powder heroin, and the dreaded M30 blue pills. But these weren't your standard illicit drugs. Forensic analysis later revealed a chemical profile that was nothing short of biological warfare. Every single pill was a game of Russian roulette, laced with a surge of fentanyl and spiked with xylazine, the notorious zombie drug used to sedate 1,000-pound animals. It's a mixture designed to paralyze the central nervous system before the heart even realizes it's stopped. The sheer scale of her operation was staggering. Intelligence estimates suggest that during her peak months in late 2025, Washington and her inner circle were funneling enough lethal units to incapacitate the entire population of Black Hawk County twice over. We are talking about a flood of thousands of doses saturating the streets. By September 2025, the Washington effect began to take its toll. The emergency rooms were the first to see the data. A sudden, violent spike in respiratory failures. In September, a user collapsed in a public restroom. Heart stopped. In November, another. By December, 2 more were found blue in the face, saved only by multiple doses of Narcan. 4 near deaths in a single 90-day window. Each one was a crimson red flag, a warning that Washington's supply was becoming a weapon of mass destruction. But instead of pulling back under the heat of a multi-agency federal investigation, Washington accelerated. She began branding her product with a chilling label, a 1. In the twisted marketing of the underworld, a 1 meant peak potency. It was a signal to every addict in the Midwest that her mixture offered the highest high at the highest risk. She knew the statistics. She knew people were dropping. But in Washington's world, an overdose wasn't a tragedy, it was a testimonial of her product's strength. The data gathered by the Tri-County Drug Enforcement Task Force is haunting. While most street-level dealers operate with a degree of caution to keep their customers alive, Washington's a 1 batch was hitting a 100% casualty rate. By late December 2025, the FBI and DEA were tracking a ghost, a woman with 15 prior felony strikes, who knew every loophole and every blind spot in the law. She managed to evade a massive dragnet involving 11 different law enforcement agencies, from the Cedar Falls Police to the Iowa Division of Narcotics Enforcement. She wasn't just selling a high, she was distributing a death sentence disguised as a grade A luxury product. And as the calendar turned to January 2026, the deadliest 24-hour countdown in the history of Waterloo began. The A1 was locked, loaded, and hitting the pavement, the 2nd of January, 2026. While the rest of the country was recovering from New Year's celebrations, the city of Waterloo was about to become ground zero for a public health catastrophe. This was the day Bridgette Washington decided to clean house with her newest, most volatile batch of A1 products. It wasn't just a bad day on the streets, it was a coordinated delivery of death. Within hours of the first transaction, the city's emergency frequencies exploded. The data from that 2-4 hour window is bone-chilling. In a typical drug crisis, overdoses happen in clusters over weeks. On January 2nd, they happened in minutes. Washington's A1 cocktail was so chemically aggressive that it achieved a 0% survival rate without immediate medical intervention. Every single person who purchased and used her mixture that day lost consciousness almost before they could pull the needle out or finish a breath. We are talking about a 100% knockdown rate. It was as if a chemical switch had been flipped across the city, dropping victims in parks, gas stations, bathrooms, and living rooms. One victim, whose story would eventually seal Washington's fate, didn't just lose consciousness, they ceased to breathe entirely. This wasn't a near miss or a scare. This was a cold, hard fatality caused by a mixture so toxic it overwhelmed the human heart's ability to pump. As the body count was verified, the Tri-County Drug Enforcement Task Force realized they weren't just looking for a dealer anymore. They were hunting a killer. The scale of the manhunt was unprecedented. For the next several weeks, a massive, invisible net began to tighten around Washington. We are talking about a sophisticated, multi-jurisdictional dragnet involving 11 separate elite agencies. The FBI and DEA provided the high-tech surveillance, tracking encrypted communications and digital footprints, while the Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Evansdale police departments hit the pavement, squeezing informants in the city's darkest corners. The Black Hawk and Bremer County Sheriff's Departments locked down the perimeters, ensuring that if Washington tried to bolt across county lines, she'd be driving straight into a blockade. Think about the resources deployed. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Iowa Division of Narcotics Enforcement, and specialized task forces, all focusing their combined firepower on one 7-year-old woman. Why? Because the lab results on the A1 batch came back with terrifying news. The levels of fentanyl were high enough to kill an elephant, and the xylazine content was so concentrated it was resistant to standard Narcan treatments. Washington wasn't just a threat to Waterloo, she was a threat to the entire Midwest supply chain. As the investigation peaked, federal prosecutors Nicole Nagan and Dan Chatham began building a watertight case. They weren't looking for a simple possession charge. They were aiming for the death-resulting enhancement, a federal hammer that carries a mandatory minimum that effectively ends a person's life outside of prison walls. They documented the 16 prior felonies, the 4 non-fatal overdoses from late 2025, and the tragic finality of the January 2nd death. Washington thought her 15 previous wins against the system meant she was untouchable. She thought the A1 brand made her a queen. But by early 2026, the queen was cornered. The 1-1 agency ghost hunt was over. The task force was no longer watching from the shadows. They were ready to kick in the door. The final chapter of Bridgette Marie Washington's criminal empire didn't end in a back alley shootout or a high-speed chase. It ended in the cold, sterile silence of a federal courtroom in Cedar Rapids. On the 6th of April, 2026, the revolving door that Washington had exploited 16 times before finally slammed shut, and this time, it was bolted from the outside. The woman who had treated the lives of Waterloo residents like disposable currency stood before United States District Court Chief Judge C.J. Williams to hear her fate. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. Federal prosecutors Nicole Nagan and Dan Chatham laid out the cold, hard data of a life dedicated to chaos. This wasn't just about one bad day in January. This was about a multi-decade defiance of the law. Washington's rap sheet was a terrifying scroll of 15 prior felony convictions, a statistical anomaly that showed a complete and utter disregard for human life and the judicial system. For years, she had gambled with other people's lives and won. But in the federal system, the House always wins. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. They didn't just present the A1 drugs. They presented the ghosts of her operation. They recounted the 4 individuals who nearly died in late 2025, people who were blue, lifeless, and only brought back from the brink by the grace of emergency responders. Then, they brought the room to a standstill with the details of the final fatality on January 2nd. The message was clear. Bridgette Washington was a biological hazard to society. When Chief Judge C.J. Williams handed down the sentence, it sent a shockwave through the local drug trade. 252 months in federal prison. That is 21 years of life behind bars. But here is the most terrifying part for anyone following in her footsteps. In the federal system, there is no parole. There is no good behavior release that will cut this down to a few years. Washington will serve nearly every single day of those 252 months. If she survives the term, she will emerge as a 8-year-old woman, only to be met by another 6 years of supervised release, where the government will watch her every breath. Currently, Washington sits in the custody of the United States Marshals, awaiting transport to a high-security federal facility. Her departure marks the end of a 7-month reign of terror that saw more overdoses than some cities see in a decade. The Tri-County Drug Enforcement Task Force, that massive 11 agency alliance, has sent a definitive message to the streets of Iowa. You can brand your poison a 1, you can hide behind 15 prior convictions, and you can try to outrun the FBI, but when the death-resulting charge hits the docket, your life as a free person is over. As the Angel of Death begins her 2-decade journey into the federal cage, the city of Waterloo finally breathes a cautious sigh of relief. But the data remains as a warning. The A1 cocktail is still a ghost haunting the Midwest, and the justice files are never truly closed. The streets are quieter tonight, but the cost of that silence was paid for in lives that can never be recovered. Case closed, justice served, the gavel has fallen, and the iron gates have swung shut on a career built on the suffering of others. Bridgette Marie Washington's 2-1-year sentence isn't just a victory for the 11 agencies that hunted her, it's a grim reminder of the high stakes in the modern opioid crisis. When dealers prioritize potency and branding over human pulse, the federal system ensures the price they pay is their own freedom. But as the dust settles in Waterloo, the question remains, who is waiting in the wings to take her place? The A1 cocktail may be off the streets for now, but the chemical war continues. We cover these files not just to tell a story, but to expose the reality of the dangers lurking in plain sight. Every statistic we mentioned today represents a real family, a real victim, and a community fighting to reclaim its streets. Before we sign off, we want to hear from you. Does a 2-1-year sentence fit a 16-time felon when a life is lost? Or is the system still missing the mark? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. I'm your narrator. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next investigation.